The soft glow of city lights reflected across the glass of the tiny apartment window as he sat there, watching the late-night traffic snake its way through downtown. It was quiet except for the low hum of passing cars and the distant laughter of people spilling out of nearby bars. To most, the city was alive and vibrant, but to him, it was a reminder of the constant grind, of how hard people worked to chase the lives they thought they deserved. He was 31, an IT consultant who had learned the value of quiet stability early on. His name was Ethan, and while he wasn't rich, he lived comfortably. Every dollar he earned came from long hours, smart investments, and the kind of discipline most people never saw. He wasn't flashy. His car was a modest silver Accord, his clothes simple, his taste practical. But what he lacked in extravagance, he made up for in loyalty and quiet kindness. Jessica entered his life on an overcast autumn afternoon 4 years ago, during a corporate networking event he'd attended only out of obligation. She was radiant, not just in beauty, but in presence. Her laughter carried across the room, confident and infectious. She had just completed her master's in marketing and was working at a small nonprofit, earning far less than she deserved but dreaming endlessly. She spoke of goals, of future promotions, of breaking ceilings. He admired that fire. It reminded him of what ambition used to feel like before responsibility hardened it into realism. In those early days, their love was easy. She'd tease him about his practicality, calling him grandpa for budgeting or for finding joy in small things like home-cooked dinners and old music. But she'd also smile when he'd show up with her favorite coffee after a long day or listen to her vent about her job. He didn't always understand her world of luxury brands and influencer dreams, but he understood her heart, or at least, he thought he did. Jessica carried with her something heavier than ambition. $78,000 in student loans that gnawed at her peace. Some nights, she'd sit on their worn-out couch, staring at her statements with glassy eyes, whispering about how it would take her decades to break free. Ethan never said much then, just quietly held her hand. But inside, he made a silent promise. He'd help lift that weight. 6 months into their relationship, he did something she never knew. Through an old college friend who worked at her loan servicer, he found out about a program that allowed anonymous third-party payments. No credit, no acknowledgement, just quiet help. From that month onward, he began paying $850 every month toward her principal, disguised as an anonymous contribution. Jessica assumed it was some government assistance, maybe a leftover Obama-era program she qualified for. She laughed sometimes, calling it her little miracle. Ethan just smiled and said, "Maybe you earned some good karma." What she didn't know was that each of those payments came from the same man who made sure her favorite flowers showed up every Friday, who remembered every small detail she loved, who believed love wasn't about grand gestures, but steady presence. For Ethan, helping her wasn't about control, it was about love. Real love, the kind that sacrifices quietly. As years passed, Jessica's career began to rise. The nonprofit job gave way to a marketing position at a fast-growing firm. She started earning more, dressing sharper, meeting people who lived in penthouses and drove European cars. With every promotion, the gap between them widened, not in affection at first, but in worldview. She began measuring success differently, in things Ethan couldn't bring himself to value. He noticed subtle changes. The way she'd hesitate before introducing him to her co-workers, the quick glances she gave when he'd drive up in his Accord, the sighs when he'd suggest cozy dinners instead of rooftop bars. Still, he held on to hope, believing love could outlast ego. Until that one night, the dinner that changed everything. It was meant to be a celebration. Jessica had landed a big client, and they met her friends at a sleek restaurant downtown, the kind of place where even the air smelled expensive, leather booths, aged wine, and faint truffle oil wafting from the kitchen. Ethan didn't fit in, and he knew it. Still, he smiled, trying to make her proud. As the wine flowed, Jessica grew louder, her laughter sharper. Surrounded by her married friends, both married to men who worked in finance, she started comparing lives. She looked at her friends' designer handbags, diamond rings, and talked about levels. Then, somewhere between her third glass of wine and dessert, she said it. "I just feel like I'm settling," she announced, her voice slicing to the laughter at the table. Look at Brittany's ring. Look at Megan's car. Meanwhile, I'm dating someone who drives an Accord and thinks Olive Garden is fancy. Her friends froze, eyes darting awkwardly. Ethan stayed quiet, every muscle in his body tightening. No offense, babe, she added with a tipsy laugh, but I'm a catch. I've got an MBA. I'm working at a top firm. You're nice, but nice doesn't buy vacation homes. The silence was suffocating. Even the waiter avoided eye contact. Ethan set down his fork gently. You're absolutely right, he said softly. Jessica blinked. What? You do deserve someone on your level, he said, his tone steady but cold. We should break up. The table went still. Jessica laughed nervously. I mean right now. But Ethan had already made up his mind. No, you're right, he said quietly. You're too good for me. Let's end this clean. He paid the bill, stood, and walked out, leaving behind the woman he'd loved, the woman whose debt he'd been quietly paying for years. Jessica didn't follow. She didn't even know yet what she'd just lost. That night, as the city lights flickered against his window, Ethan sat in silence. The same window he'd once looked through when dreaming about their future now only reflected one truth. Love without gratitude is just illusion. The night after that dinner stretched endlessly. Ethan sat alone in his apartment. The quiet hum of the fridge, the only sound breaking the silence. On the table before him, his phone lit up again and again. 16 missed calls, dozens of messages from Jessica. I was just venting. You're seriously going to throw away 4 years over one comment. I mean it, Ethan. Please just talk to me. He read every message, but each one felt emptier than the last. Words came easily when regret set in, but they meant little after 4 years of subtle dismissals, quiet digs, and the steady erosion of respect. He'd spent years building her up, easing her burdens, and in return, she tore him down in front of others. Not because he'd failed her, but because she couldn't see beyond her own pride. So, with a heavy breath, he sent a single reply. You made your feelings clear. I'm respecting your decision to find someone better. Then he blocked her. The next morning, the sun cut to the blinds, golden light spilling across his desk. A new day, but not yet a free one. There was unfinished business to settle. He picked up the phone and called his old friend Tyler, the one who worked at the loan servicing company. Hey, Ethan began, his voice calm but distant. I need to cancel those anonymous payments. Tyler was silent for a moment. You mean the ones for Jessica? Yeah, Ethan said. It's time. Man, you've paid off what? 52 grand of her principal already. You sure? Ethan leaned back, staring at the ceiling. She told me I wasn't a real man. So yeah, I'm sure. Tyler exhaled slowly. You're a better man than most. But yeah, I'll cancel it. Her next statement's going to be a wake-up call. That payment's doubling without your contributions. Then maybe it's about time she sees the truth, Ethan replied. When he hung up, the silence in the room felt different, not lonely, but liberating. For the first time in 4 years, his love wasn't tied to her debt, but Ethan wasn't finished. There were loose ends, threads of generosity Jessica had long mistaken for entitlement. The apartment lease, streaming accounts, the phone plan, everything she'd grown comfortable using as though it were hers. He started cutting the cords one by one. The Netflix, Disney Plus, HBO accounts canceled. Her gym membership terminated. Her phone removed from his family plan. The landlord notified of his move out within 30 days. Each cancellation wasn't vengeance. It was closure. She had called him controlling once for setting boundaries. Now, she would understand what true independence felt like. By afternoon, his phone began buzzing again, but this time from her work email. My phone got shut off. WTF? Netflix isn't working. The gym just called about payment failure. Are you serious right now? He didn't reply. 3 days later, the pounding on his front door began. Through the Ring camera, he saw Jessica, eyes red, makeup smudged, flanked by her sister Amy and their mother, Darlene. Open up. Darlene shouted. We need to talk. Ethan pressed the speaker button. His voice came calm, almost attached. No thanks. Jessica made it clear she needs a real man. I'm not that, remember? Stop being a child. Amy yelled, her tone sharp. She was drunk, Ethan. She didn't mean it. Drunk words are sober thoughts, he replied. Jessica finally stepped forward, voice trembling. Please, can we just talk? My loans, something happened. The payment jumped to $1,600 a month. I can't afford that. Ethan paused. Sounds like something a real man could help with. I'm just a guy with an Accord, remember? Her lips quivered. This isn't funny. I'll get evicted. The lease is in my name, he said flatly. You got 27 days to find a new place. Darlene's face turned red. You can't just throw her out like this. She's been paying rent. Ethan chuckled softly. She's been paying $400 a month toward a $2,200 apartment because I felt bad about her loans. There was silence, followed by shouting, tears, and the kind of desperate apologies that come too late. But Ethan didn't waver. They eventually left, Jessica's sobs fading down the hallway. That evening, the chaos spilled online. Jessica took to social media, her posts dripping with self-pity and venom. When he shows his true colors after 4 years, cutting off my phone, cancel my gym, even Netflix. So much for love. Ladies, this is what happens when you date down. They get vindictive when you try to level up. Within minutes, comments poured in, friends consoling her, strangers validating her narrative. Words like narcissistic, controlling, and financial abuse echoed through the thread. Ethan didn't respond. He didn't need to. Truth, he'd learned, doesn't require defense. It just needs time. But what Jessica didn't know was that Ethan had quietly sent a resume to Tom, the owner of a rival marketing firm, a man he'd once helped with a major tech issue. Hey, Tom, Ethan said over the phone, explaining the story. You might want to hear this. Tom laughed when he saw Jessica's post. So she's calling you pathetic while you've been secretly paying off her debt? That's gold. Send me her resume. I might have a spot. Just want to see how this plays out. And just like that, the wheel of karma began to turn. Jessica had built her world on appearances. Now that world was beginning to crack. That night, Ethan stood once more by the window, looking down at the city that had watched their love rise and fall. For years, he'd mistaken gratitude for affection, obligation for devotion. But love wasn't about rescuing someone who never learned to swim. It was about walking beside someone who wanted to learn. For the first time in a long time, he didn't feel small. He felt free. 3 days after their confrontation at the door, the calm that Jessica had been clinging to finally shattered. Bills had started arriving in thick envelopes, the kind that came stamped with red ink and warnings. She sat on her bed, paper spread across the comforter like scattered regrets. Her hands trembled as she traced the numbers. The new payment schedule, the interest recalculations, the ballooning total she hadn't seen coming. When she saw $1,587 due this month, her breath caught in her throat. It didn't make sense. For years, her statements had shown manageable numbers, reduced balances, consistent progress. She believed she was finally winning. Now, it felt like she'd stepped into a financial nightmare. She called the loan company. After an hour on hold, the representative confirmed what she didn't want to hear. The previous third-party contributions have stopped. The voice said, without them, your payment has reverted to the standard rate. Jessica frowned. What third party? I thought those were federal subsidies. I'm sorry, ma'am, the rep said. Those payments were from a registered private contributor. Anonymous, but consistent for 4 years. Looks like they were canceled this week. Her heart sank. Anonymous? She had never questioned it, never wondered who was helping her. Some part of her had assumed she deserved it, that the universe was finally rewarding her effort. Now, faced with the truth that someone had been quietly carrying her, she felt something she hadn't in a long time, shame. And there was only one person who came to mind. She hesitated for an hour before dialing Ethan's number from a friend's phone. When he answered, his tone was cool, detached. Something's wrong with my loans, she said, voice shaky. They're saying I owe way more than before. That's weird, Ethan said flatly. Can you look into it? You know about finances. I'm not a real man, remember? His tone didn't rise. It didn't need to. The words hit harder in their calmness. Real men handle their women's finances. Find one of those. Stop throwing that in my face, she pleaded. I need help. You need a real man, he replied. I need to go. The line went dead. For the first time in years, Jessica felt completely alone. She stared at her phone, waiting for him to call back. To say he didn't mean it, to offer to help anyway. But the silence lingered, heavy and cold. Over the next few days, denial gave way to obsession. She couldn't accept that the payments had simply vanished. It had to be fraud, some administrative mistake. So she scraped together what little savings she had left and hired a lawyer, hoping to prove she was a victim of some error. 2 days later, the lawyer called. His tone was careful, measured. Jessica, the servicer released the payment logs. You might want to sit down. What do you mean? The records show all anonymous payments originated from the same IP address. It's linked to Ethan's network. Every month, $850 consistent, on time. He's contributed over $52,000 in total. Jessica froze. Her breath came shallow, eyes wide as the wave it sank in. Ethan, all this time, all those nights she complained about being broke, about him not understanding her struggles. He'd been quietly paying them down, without credit or acknowledgement. He hadn't done it for praise. He'd done it because he loved her, and she'd thrown it away in front of her friends like it was nothing. The voicemail she left him that night was frantic, almost incoherent. Her voice cracked halfway through. You've been paying my loans for 4 years and you never told me? Who does that? Why would you do that and not say anything? I feel so stupid. Please, Ethan, just call me back. When he finally responded, it wasn't with a call, just a text. I did it because I loved you and wanted to ease your stress. But apparently, that made me not ambitious enough. Good luck with the payments. The words blurred before her eyes as tears streamed down her cheeks. For years, she'd equated love with luxury, success with status. Ethan's love had been quiet, selfless, invisible, and she'd mistaken it for weakness. Now that she could see it for what it was already gone. Meanwhile, Ethan was settling into a different kind of peace. He'd spent the weekend cleaning the apartment, packing up the last remnants of their shared life. The framed photo from their first trip, the coffee mug she once claimed as hers, the cardigan she always left on the couch. Each item went into a box marked donate. His phone buzzed. It was Tom, the marketing firm owner. Bro, you need to see what your ex just did in her interview. What happened? Ethan asked, cautious. Tom chuckled. She came in like she owned the place, bragged about her connections, demanded a $120K base salary, and said her last relationship ended because her ex couldn't handle her success. Oh, and she accused you of sabotaging her finances. Ethan sighed. She actually said that? Word for word. Claimed you were dating below your league, and got bitter when she outgrew you. I recorded it. You have to hear this. When Ethan listened to the clip, he didn't feel anger. He felt something else. Pity? The woman in that recording wasn't the Jessica he'd fallen in love with. This version was desperate to appear powerful, but her voice cracked between boasts. She didn't even realize how hollow it all sounded. Tom's laughter faded as he spoke again. She's talented, but no way I'm hiring her. The industry's small. People talk. You can't badmouth your ex while your resume's still warm. Ethan nodded silently. Yeah, I figured. When he hung up, he looked out the window again. The same skyline that had watched their story unfold now looked different. Not brighter, not darker, just clearer. He finally saw it for what it was, not a loss, but a lesson. Some people measure love in gifts and glitter, others in quiet sacrifice. And sometimes the difference between the two determines who ends up free and who ends up paying forever. The following weeks were brutal. Jessica's world, once cushioned by ambition and confidence, began to cave in piece by piece. Not with loud crashes, but with quiet humiliations that stripped away her pride one layer at a time. Her job at the firm was the first to go. They cited department restructuring, but she knew the truth. Ever since the story of her breakup, and her harsh words about Ethan began circulating in whispers, the workplace atmosphere had shifted. She noticed in the way colleagues exchanged looks when she entered meetings, in the sudden pauses of conversation whenever she passed by. Then came the email from HR. Your position is being dissolved effective immediately. You'll receive a severance package of 2 weeks. Just like that, the woman who once bragged about her independence was staring at a blank calendar, her once-packed schedule suddenly empty. For the first time in years, silence filled her mornings. No rush to get dressed, no conference calls, no deadlines. Just the hum of the refrigerator and the weight of thoughts she'd spent years avoiding. Rent was due soon. Without Ethan's subtle contributions in her paycheck, she found herself calculating every dollar, something she hadn't done since college. The designer handbags, the expensive skincare, the takeout dinners, all suddenly felt like ghosts from a past life. When she opened her banking app and saw less than $200 remaining, panic set in. She reached out to a few friends, the same ones who once encouraged her to aim higher, who had laughed at Ethan's thriftiness. But their responses were cold, rehearsed. Oh, just that sucks. I wish I could help, but things are tight right now. Maybe just sell some stuff? You got nice things. They had moved on, busy flaunting curated lives on social media. She had become a cautionary tale, the woman who dumped her steady boyfriend for growth and ended up falling alone. When she tried to sell her designer bag online, the buyer offered half its price. She accepted it without bargaining. That night, as she packed into a shipping box, she caught a reflection in the mirror. Hair unkempt, eyes puffy from crying, surrounded by empty cardboard. For the first time, she saw not a victim of circumstance, but a woman who had mistaken arrogance for empowerment. She whispered into the quiet, "You were the problem, Jess." Meanwhile, Ethan's life had begun to take a new shape, not glamorous, but grounded. He had accepted promotion at his small tech firm, not because he needed to prove anything, but because he finally believed he could lead without someone doubting him. His colleagues respected him. His manager often told him, "You've got that balance, smart but humble." On weekends, he volunteered with a local mentorship program for underprivileged youth. It wasn't a flashy gig, but it gave him purpose, teaching teenagers how to budget, apply for scholarships, and build confidence the right way. When one of the boys asked him, "Did someone ever teach you this stuff?" Ethan smiled faintly. "No, I learned the hard way." He didn't talk about Jessica, not in bitterness, not even in reflection. To him, she was a closed chapter, one that had taught him more about love than any success story could. But life has a way of looping stories back together. One rainy evening, months after their last exchange, Ethan walked into a small cafe after work. The place was quiet, dim lights, the soft sound of espresso machines, and a few scattered customers hunched over laptops. As he approached the counter, he froze. Jessica was there, not as a customer, but behind the counter, her hair tied up, wearing a faded apron, hands trembling slightly as she handed a receipt to man ahead of him. She didn't notice him at first, but when their eyes met, time seemed to stop. For a moment, neither spoke. The hum of the cafe filled the space between them, awkward, heavy, and strangely familiar. Finally, she broke the silence. "Ethan." He nodded politely. "Hey, you look good," she said softly. "How have you been?" "Better," he replied, gently but truthfully. Her throat tightened. "That's good." She tried to smile, but her eyes gave her away. There was exhaustion there, not just physical, but emotional, like a candle burned from both ends. He hesitated before asking, "You working here now?" She nodded, cheeks flushing. "Yeah, just for now. Trying to get back on my feet." There was no mockery in his tone when he said, "That's good. It's honest work." Tears welled up in her eyes, not because of pity, but because of how calmly he said it. No judgment, no anger, just sincerity. "I never said thank you," she whispered. "For what?" "For everything. For believing in me. For helping me. For loving me when I didn't deserve it." He nodded, the faintest smile touching his lips. "You don't owe me anything, Jess. Just learn from it." As he turned to leave, She wanted to stop him, to say something, anything that could undo the years of pride. But there was nothing left to say. Some mistakes don't get closure. Some lessons only settle in when the person who taught them has already walked away. That night, Jessica sat in her small apartment, a one-bedroom walk-up with peeling paint and leaky faucets, and scrolled through old photos on her phone. There was one from 2 years ago, Ethan laughing, holding a coffee mug she once mocked as cheap. She stared at it for a long time, realizing that back then he hadn't been struggling. He'd just been real, and she had traded real for the illusion of more. She whispered into the dark, voice breaking, "You were the real man." Winter settled over the city like a heavy gray blanket. The streets glittered with frost, and every breath came out in invisible clouds, reminders that life, no matter how cold, still continued. For Jessica, each day began before sunrise. She'd grown used to early shifts at the cafe. The clatter of mugs, the smell of roasted beans, the constant rhythm of orders called and answered. It wasn't glamorous, but it was honest. There was something strangely healing about serving others, something grounding in learning to listen, to smile, to care again. Gone were the designer handbags and luxury heels. She wore simple sneakers now, a thrifted coat, and a hair tie she kept around her wrist. For the first time in years, she lived without pretense. Her co-workers, mostly college students and single moms, didn't care who she used to be. They only knew the woman who stayed late to help close, who covered shifts without complaint, who offered warm drinks to regulars having bad days. It was humbling, but it was real. And slowly, without her realizing it, she began to rebuild. Not her lifestyle, but herself. On weekends, she started volunteering at a local shelter, inspired by the kind of quiet generosity she had once mocked. She helped women who had lost everything, jobs, homes, dignity, and in their eyes, she saw pieces of her former self. One afternoon, as she packed boxes of donated clothes, a volunteer beside her mentioned a name that made her freeze. Ethan Grant. You know him? He funds part of this program. Doesn't like taking credit, though. Jessica's breath caught. He funds it. Yeah, the woman smiled. Helps with mentorships, too. Great guy. Real heart for people. Jessica nodded faintly, a sad smile tugging at her lips. Of course he does. Even now, even after everything, he was still helping, not for recognition, not for love, just because that's who he was. Later that evening, she walked home through the snow, her breath fogging in the chill. The city lights shimmered against the frozen streets, and somewhere between the crunch of her footsteps and the hum of distant traffic, she realized something. She didn't miss the life she'd lost. She missed the peace she'd once had with him, the peace that came from knowing love didn't need to be loud to be true. Months passed, and spring slowly returned. By then, Jessica had saved enough to move into a modest apartment. Small, but bright. The walls were bare, but they felt like hers. She kept one framed photo on the shelf, a sunrise over the city skyline, taken on the morning she'd started her new job. Beneath it, a sticky note read, "Gratitude rebuilds everything." One Friday, as she was wiping down tables near closing time, a familiar voice caught her attention. "Medium latte, 1 sugar, no foam." Her heart stuttered. She looked up, and there he was. Ethan stood at the counter, casual in a gray jacket, eyes kind but distant. Time had softened him, but his calm presence was the same. Their eyes met. Neither spoke for a long moment. She finally broke the silence with a trembling smile. "You still remember your order?" He smiled faintly. "Some things don't change." She made his coffee, careful, steady hands this time, and slid across the counter. He nodded, took a sip, then looked at her. "You seem different," he said quietly. "I am," she admitted. "Life has a way of fixing your perspective." He nodded. "Yeah, it does." For a second, it almost felt like old times, the shared warmth, the unspoken understanding. But both of them knew those days were gone. What remained wasn't love rekindled, but respect reclaimed. Before he left, she gathered her courage. "Ethan, thank you, not just for what you did before, but for walking away. I wouldn't have learned otherwise." He looked at her, really looked, and nodded. I'm glad you did." And then, with a small, genuine smile, he turned and walked out into the evening light. Jessica stood behind the counter, watching him fade into the crowd. She didn't cry. She didn't chase him. She simply whispered to herself, softly, but with a peace that ran deep, he was the real man. And maybe now, I'm finally becoming a real woman. Outside, the sun dipped below the skyline, painting the city in hues of gold and rose. Life moved on, not with grand endings or perfect reconciliations, but with quiet strength and second chances. Because sometimes love doesn't return the way you expect. Sometimes it leaves behind a better version of you.